So to start off talking about Japan, we're going to talk about where it's located. This is a map of Japan and what it looks like. It's off the east coast of Asia, and it's basically a long island chain in the Pacific Ocean. It's located between the Okhotsk Sea, the Sea of Japan, and the Philippine Sea. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is the climate. And their climate changes per month, just like it does here. But in January, they usually are in the upper 40s to lower 50s. In February, it's pretty consistent to be in the 50s. In March, it's in the high 50s. In April, it's the mid 60s. In May, it's the low 70s. And then June and July, we get into the low to high 80s. And August is actually their hottest month. They get into the 90s and sometimes the hundreds, but not very often. And then in September, they usually are in the 80s, October the 70s, November the 50s to 60s, and December it's pretty much the low 50s. And now to everybody's favorite part, the food. The Japanese culture has a bunch of different types of food and a bunch of different dishes, but I'm just going to show you a few. The first we have is sushi. I'm sure that we all know what that is, but the most basic it gets is raw seafood and rice. Next up we have tempura, which is a dish of battered and fried fish, seafood, and veggies. And lastly, we have yakitori, which is very, very similar to our shish kebabs. It's a dish of bite-sized chicken grilled on a skewer. Okay, so now we're going to get into the music culture of Japan. The music I've been playing in the background this whole time is actually some Japanese calming music. The one thing that I found really interesting about the Japanese music culture is that they have some instruments that we don't really use here that much in our songs, so I wanted to tell you a little bit about those and what they sound like. So this is called a samisen. It kind of resembles our violin, and I'm going to show you what it looks like and what it sounds like. So this is what it looks like, and then what it sounds like on its own. So that was just a little clip of what it sounds like on its own. And the next thing we're going to talk about is a shakuhachi, which is like kind of like a flute and a recorder mixed together. And it usually has 5 holes, sometimes it has 4, but I'm going to show you what that sounds like. So that was a guy basically just playing the basic scales of it. But our next instrument is actually really important to the Japanese culture. It's labeled their national instrument. It's called a koto. And this is what it looks like and sounds like. So those are just a few of the Japanese instruments that I've found really interesting, and I love how they look and love how they sound. So maybe in the background music, you'll hear them. And now we're going to talk about the art. One thing that you might see in common in a lot of art and paintings in Japan is that it's a lot of times based off of their nature. They have big, beautiful cherry blossoms, beautiful waves, beautiful cities, and everything. So a lot of times their paintings are based off of that. The first artist we're going to talk about is Tomio. He was known for doing bright colors and bold brushstrokes. This is his most famous painting, and it's called Writing a Nostalgic Poem While Moon Watching. The next artist we're going to talk about is Ogata. He was known for putting his own style into his art and his characteristic bold impressions. This is his most famous painting. It's called Red and White Plum Blossoms. So the family structure in Japan has changed from past to present, so I'm going to talk about a little bit of both. But this is what a normal family in Japan would look like, and it's pretty normal to us, right? It looks pretty similar to ours. So in the past, the Japanese family structure was very patriarchal. The father worked outside while the mother worked inside. The kids were to do chores, and they were very strict on discipline, and etiquette was very exercised. And there was an average of 6 kids per house. So in the present, it's a little bit different. It's still patriarchal, but a lot less. Both parents are inside and out. The kids are mainly outside. Discipline is a little bit more laid back, and the etiquette isn't really as strict as it was. So now I'm going to talk about the houses and the home life of a Japanese culture. This is what an outside of a regular Japanese home would look like, and it's pretty normal, right? The only thing that's different is their roof structures are a little bit different. They have little curves at the end. But there are some features inside that we don't really have here. One of them is rice paper walls. These are really common there and really common to have in every single room. The next is a sliding door. I'm not going to put a picture because we all know what that is. They have sliding doors to the outside, to the back of their house, which is kind of what we have here in some houses. The next is foldable screens. This is what it looks like. I'm pretty sure you've seen it in movies and things like that. It's usually used for privacy. And the next is a floor of tatami mats. This is what the mat would look like. And lastly but not least is futon beds. Now for futon beds, we think of like a folded out couch type of thing. It's actually basically looks like this. It's like a mattress on the floor. Their home lives aren't much different. Like I said, the parents do the work mainly on the inside and the outside of the house. The kids do help with the outside of the house, but a lot of the times the kids are at school or doing different activities, kind of like we are. And the only thing that I would say is really different is that they do have a tea time there where all the family gets together and they have tea together in the afternoon, kind of like they do in the European countries. Now we're going to get into the social hierarchy of Japan, and we're going to think of it like a pyramid, and we're going to start at the top. So that at the very top is the emperor, and then we go down to the shogun, which is a political leader, and then we get the daimyos, which is a noble. Now we're going to get into the warrior class of the pyramid, a samurai, which is a warrior, and then a ronin, which is a paid soldier. And now the next two are the 90% of the population. We have a peasant, which is a farmer and a fisherman, and we have an artisan, which is a craftsperson. And now we're going to get into the last line, which is the lower class, and they're called merchants, which are the salespeople. So the salespeople will usually sell the artisans things and stuff like that, but they're the very lower class. You'll see them when you go around in markets and different things like that. So the next thing we're going to talk about is education. So this is what the outside of a school building would look like in Japan. It's pretty basic, right? So the inside of the classroom looks like this, and that looks just like ours, right? So majority of the population go to public schools, and they still do have uniforms. It's the basic white button-up with a tie, sometimes khaki pants, sometimes blue pants. And there are private schools, but they're not very common. One thing that's different about the education in Japan is that they're a year-round school that starts in April and then ends the following March. They have a 6-week break of summer. It usually starts in August, and they have a winter break in December to January. Another thing that's different is that a lot of schools in Japan go from Monday to Saturday instead of Monday to Friday. There is like a Monday to Friday schools, but it's not very common. They usually go from Monday to Saturday. And now we're going to talk about wars. This is the Japanese war flag. It symbolizes a sun rising. There are a few differences about war in Japan than there are here. All males are registered at the age of 17 for a draft, and they must serve 1 year in the war. This is after 6 months of training, so they have to go through the 6 months of training before they can do the whole year. We do have basic training here, but not everybody is forced into the war, right? So they usually have to serve at least 1.5 years with the military. Some wars that Japan has been in that you might know is the Sinu War, which was in 1895, World War II, which was in the 1940s, and then they were also involved in the Cold War. Okay, so the last thing we have today is religion, and the religion is much like us here. And what I mean by that is because there's a bunch of different religions that people practice. So the first one is Shintoism, which is 79.2% of the population, and this is where they worship nature. The next religion we have is Buddhism, which is 66.8% of the population, and they worship Buddha. And our next one is Christianity, which is 1.5% of the population, and we know what that is. It's where they worship God. And lastly, they have a other category, which is only 7.1% of the population. So this is basically anything else. So that's all I have on Japan, but I did look into some things to say in Japanese, and I'm going to say goodbye in Japanese. So sayonara.